My baseball.
Morning, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'd like to call this Planning and Development Committee meeting to order at 9:12, May 3rd, 2023. Approval of the agenda. Anybody have any adjustments? Okay. Having none, can I have a motion to approve the agenda? Ian, Deb, thank you. Okay, adoption of the minutes. Recommended that the minutes of the Planning and Development Committee meeting held on April 19th, 2023 be adopted. Has everybody read those? Okay, a mover, John, seconder, Ian, thank you. Okay, development service update. Scott, working on the TV?
On the camera.
Oh, camera, okay.
More button on the side.
Yeah, I apologize for the delay. We were having a step code meeting this morning. It's just a introduction and bring everybody up to date on the step code. So we will be discussing that when we get into the bylaw here amendment.
Right, we might be flying without a camera, so people just have to trust that we're actually here in this room. Yeah, the development services update. So we have the list of current applications, a couple new ones that we just received, and we're just under review right now, just communicating with the applicants, get everything lined up. Again, you can see the different applications that when they came to the PDC or council, and yeah, so we're working towards those.
I just got a message like that the meeting, they're waiting for the host to start the meeting, the online. Has that happened?
Yeah, we do have people in the meeting.
So, okay, good. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Ian. You have a question?
Yeah, so 113 went up, that's the micro suites, correct? So where are we with that? Because we did first and second reading. Are we going to public hearing on that soon?
Right, so we did go to first and second reading on that. They do have a little hiccup with contaminated sites, so council can't adopt a zoning bylaw unless it's been cleared. So we're waiting for that. In the meantime, if we do receive a complete development permit application, then we can move forward with the rezoning, but then the development permit becomes the next kind of stopping point. So yeah, so we're just working with them, get that development permit application complete, get it to this committee, and then we can continue with the rezoning process.
So yeah, so he has to go through that process with the province, much like down at Mountain Park. Okay.
Scott, just on that, at the very bottom there, there's he's applied for a development permit. Is that on there?
Correct.
He's applied. Okay. Okay. Good to know. That development permit for number 13-383 Silver Sands Road, that's on hold. Which one's that? Is that?
So that's one, it's for someone placing a park model. So they want the setback reduced to 5 meters. So it's on hold on their behalf. They want to see how the larger process works.
Okay.
They always have the opportunity to continue with their variance though.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? John or Deb? Okay. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate you bringing us up to date on the current applications. Okay. Moving on to new business. Building regulations bylaw amendment. I wanted to touch base with you on this, Scott and staff. When we received the application on Friday, we had like 395 pages to go through on this agenda. And it's a fairly large agenda. It's probably the biggest agenda we've had so far. And I just, after listening to the step code this morning, and, you know, kind of even hearing from Kenny saying that the province still doesn't even have the procedures bylaw manual ready. I think we're rushing this, and I don't want to rush this like we rushed. I mean, we didn't rush the zoning bylaw, but we had some issues with the zoning bylaw. I just think with the step code is it's a big document, like it's going to be a big document, and I don't understand it, and I don't think most of the people understand it yet. We are going to adopt it, it's mandatory, but I just think we need a little bit of time. And I do think that we should separate The sitting, I think it's two different items, the sitting placement of sheds and stuff like that. We haven't discussed that much. So myself, I would recommend we table this until we have a little bit of time to review it. And once we figure out all this, because most of the stuff we're working on the zoning bylaw is to do with, you know, portable buildings and things like that. And I do think we should have that under control before we move this forward to council, myself. Scott, you want to mention or reply or?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different changes to the building regulations bylaw. It has been updated since 2007 when it was adopted. So there are some changes. One part of it is the BC Energy Step Code, which is the one that we need to get done. If we're accepting applications, every new building permit has to be built to code, and it's kind of a nebulous void until we have it in our bylaws as to how to deal with it. And you're right, the second one, I think there's probably a dozen other little changes, one of them being siting permits, then we have enforcement, those types of things that we've been lacking on. So, I mean, this group can send any recommendation they want to council. And then the goal is to have it in front of the committee of the whole, the next committee of the whole meeting. So yeah, we can discuss it at this meeting. If you wanna put it off to a different time, then we can do that as well. But yeah, the step code is the big one that yeah, we kind of need to have done for not only energy efficiency, but just for efficiency of processing.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
Yeah, I don't think 2 weeks. I mean, we're talking about maybe dealing with this at our next planning and development meeting. And I mean, speaking as a councillor, I guess, I don't think this is ready to go to council yet. Certainly not next week. Absolutely not. So I think what it should do, it should come back here in 2 weeks. Then we'll get it to council after that. And this should all be wrapped up by the end of May. I don't think we're not creating a void for too long that I think is going to be, you know, too hazardous for us. So, and I think there's some comments that I heard just at the tail end of the builder's breakfast that I think we should be following up on in terms of the process, even within our bylaws. So I think some of that was good comments. And then I think there's a few other comments that people want to make on the siting permits, because that's a different thing. And I certainly want to get my head wrapped around that. I'm not going to be sitting here giving a recommendation to council that I'll sit out in a week and then basically say, I'm not prepared to, you know, vote on that today. And I wouldn't be prepared to vote on that next week either, because I think there needs to be a little consultation on that. And I understand that we'll go to public hearing, but public hearings are terrible places for public consultation, right?
It wouldn't go to public hearing.
It wouldn't?
There's no public hearing
I mean, on the siting permit.
on the changes to the building regulations.
Okay, well then even worse. So I want to actually have those conversations now. I think a lot of people will have opinions on siting permits and what that means and how does that change things. So I think if we move this 2 weeks, we come back, deal with it at this committee. The committee, I think, has to, you know, then make a recommendation to council, then it goes to council. So we're talking, what are we talking about? 3 weeks here, maybe a month. And I think that gives enough time to actually do this properly and digest it. That's kind of what I'm doing there.
Thanks, Ian. Deb?
Just a question to Scott through the chair. Is there a reason that it's better for you to bundle the step code with these other citing changes and that? Like, is it a big hassle to have it split out in terms of presenting it separately to council? Or I just want to make sure I understand.
No hassle.
Okay.
We can separate out. We can have 12 different amendments. It's just,
Or, you know, just in ones that fit together better. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Deb. Kenny, can I ask, I mean, most people are building to step 3 already. It's not like it's, you know, we're only losing a month or not even a month, but do you see a problem at all?
So the challenge, the one thing I do want to clarify for the step code piece of it is this bylaw amendment isn't to bring step code into effect here. It is in effect. As it currently sits, as of March 1st, step code is in effect across the whole province. The changes that we're proposing in the bylaw, or the amendments that we're proposing in the bylaw here, are to allow a prescriptive option over the performance. So as far as what Scott's referring to when we're talking about the kind of the void is, at this point from now, Monday on, any applications we receive for anything, any new dwellings would have to be accompanied by that energy advisory report before we could accept the application, because that is the bare minimum as the province has set it in the code. Although they haven't given us the final language as far as what the codes are going to be, it is in effect as it currently sits. So that would mean we would have to require the performance option for every new home built. So the changes that are proposed are just to provide that alternative option to then proceed forward.
Okay, and being a building inspector, you'll be lenient and allow the building permit to go ahead if it looks like they're, if everything looks in order, or that they are trying to follow the step code?
The challenge we have is that we do have to, the way the codes are written, we have to have those reports in place. We wouldn't be able to provide that flexibility based on the current language of the code, which is why we would like to put those amendments into place, which that allows us that flexibility in those situations. But without the amendments as it currently sits, it would be full enforcement of the code as it is currently written, which is full performance options for step 3.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but what I was hearing this morning is nobody wants prescriptive anyway, because it costs too much.
Yeah.
So it's not like that's probably going to be much of a backlog if we're 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, you're right, Doug.
Yeah,
Ian?
and I think it's within the time period we're talking about. We're not talking about, okay, kicking this can down the road 3-4 months. We're talking 2 weeks. So anything there that I think it's better to take a little more time, take a look at it. We're gonna come back 3 weeks, 4 weeks tops, and then that prescriptive model will be placed in. I think that's more prudent than running her through today.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I would feel more comfortable with that. Is there any, can I have a motion? Anybody want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to table this to our next table, I believe 5A, to our next planning and development committee meeting in 2 weeks.
Okay, is there a seconder? John?
Just one point of clarification, our discussion. So in addition, talk about splitting out.
Yeah, I think when it comes back, we'll split it out
Okay.
as well, just on the agenda, because they are, in my mind, 2 very separate issues. One, step code have to do, other one don't have to do, right? So it becomes a different discussion in that regard. And plus, there's just different issues with them in my mind. But
Okay, thanks, Ian. Deb, John, thank you very much. Okay, all in favor? All right. Okay, carried. Hey, moving on to Heritage Registry. Who has this one?
So it's actually, we're going for outside help. We have the Heritage Society who's gonna present.
Great.
To get myself next.
This is Barb Davidson, by the way. So,
okay.
If you remember about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, we recognized the Red Barn through a heritage bylaw. So we actually got approached by Barb and Victoria. I don't know if Victoria's here. We got approached by Barb and Victoria about the Bruin House and having it recognized, and realized that bylaw process was just too onerous for homeowners. So here's another option. It's a registry, and it's really this from the community to promote heritage in the community. And yeah, it's not as restricted as the bylaw. So it's a new program that that probably could really help out and raise the profile of some of the heritage property in Sycamus.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present our community heritage registry. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that our meeting is being held on the unceded Splatching territory of the Secwepemc Nation. Our committee has put in several hundred volunteer hours since we last came before the planning development committee on October 12th. As you may recall, Scott Beeching facilitated this community-led initiative to help fill a gap with regards to formally recognizing the value of local heritage. As he said, it began when a community member wished to have their property added to a heritage registry in Sycamores, but discovered that one did not exist. Our volunteer committee is composed of 6 community members, and we have 5 of them here today. We are sponsored by the board of the Sycamores District Museum and Historical Society with support from the district. So if you could just put your hand up, Deb Heap, Sarah Martin, Dean Handley, Hannah Chipman, Victoria is not able to make it, and myself as chair, Barb Davidson. After your review and comments, our main goal today is for you to recommend that this registry be forwarded to mayor and council for adoption. Following this, our committee will disband and the registry will be administered by the district. Okay, Steffi. There are many benefits implementing a community heritage registry, both for the entire community and for individual property owners. The main purposes for creating the Community Heritage Registry are to recognize and acknowledge our diverse heritage and to increase the profile of sites with heritage value. But other community benefits are also encompassed: reconciliation, community direction, identity, and pride. Winston Churchill once said, "The longer you look back, the farther you can look forward." Okay? While there are many community benefits, there are also benefits to property owners, such as awareness, access to mapping, special provisions, grants, and incentives. Each municipality can develop their own customized list of incentives, for example, relaxation of bylaw requirements, property tax exemptions, grant programs, etc. Okay, Steffi. What is a community heritage registry? It is simply an official listing of properties identified by a local government as having heritage value or heritage character. It can be mandatory or voluntary. A heritage register can include both sites designated through bylaw and non-designated heritage sites. What it is not: a heritage registry does not provide any form of legal protection. Listing of a non-designated property on the heritage registry does not restrict any future development actions proposed by an owner, but it gives council an opportunity to pause the issuance of permits for 60 days to explore options for conservation or enhancement of heritage features. Being on a heritage registry typically does not produce property value. Our process. How is this registry created? Through our 8 committee meetings and workshops, we tailored this registry specifically for Sycamores by brainstorming our own vision statement, goals, themes, heritage values, and criteria. Our committee canvassed the community through a variety of means to solicit suggestions of sites that Sycamoresians feel have heritage value, including interviews with pioneers, hosting a booth at public events, a poster campaign, interactive mapping, and others. Our committee took, we've skipped ahead one. There seems to be a slide that's missing. So if you'll bear with me, I'll read it. Our committee took some time developing a vision statement. And the vision statement is: the Sycamores Community Heritage Registry is a dynamic document, part roadmap, part inspiration, that is shaping our future by celebrating our local identity, recognizing our tangible and intangible past, from the First Peoples forward to present day. We are very conscious that the history of Sycamoose did not begin with the arrival of the Europeans, and we considered including a section of history in our document, but realized it would only capture details of the past 200 years. We had several Zoom meetings with staff from Splatching to make them aware of our project and to determine if they had any interest in participating. Splatching staff are interested, and at some point may wish to have cultural Indigenous stories included. Therefore, we see our community heritage registry as being flexible and open to change. Community heritage registries are intended to be unique within each community. Therefore, our committee was tasked with brainstorming themes and associated heritage values drawn from Sycamoose's specific history. The three themes that our committee landed on are cultural environment, natural environment, and built environment. Each of these themes has further been divided into 18 to 14 heritage values per theme. If a property owner is interested in being included in the heritage registry, they must submit a package to Planning and Development Services that includes a statement of significance and a letter of consent. Following this submission, it will be reviewed by staff and or a council sanctioned committee. If deemed appropriate, the submission will be forwarded to council for deliberation. If council agrees, they will nominate the property to the heritage registry by resolution. The last step is for the submission to be forwarded by staff to the province's Heritage BC branch within 30 days, so that it can, in turn, be added to the provincial heritage registry. A couple of notes. It is within council's authority to add properties to the community heritage registry without the owner's consent. While this option may be considered in the future, our committee feels that the softer volunteer approach is more appropriate at this time, hence the requirement for letters of consent. Secondly, sites listed on the provincial registry must be real property, and that is defined as being attached to the land. Several of the heritage resources identified by our community do not fall under this definition. For example, the 1928 Godfredson fire truck. Therefore, it can be on our heritage registry, but not the provincial registry. Here is an example of a statement of significance prepared by our committee. It can range from 1 to 3 pages. Each statement of significance has the following 5 sections, including a table of data, a brief description of the site, a description of its heritage values, followed by character defining elements, and finally, there is a section for related anecdotes or interesting stories. Committee members have prepared and included 7 statements of significance in the document for council to consider as the first nominations to the registry. Over 55 sites were identified by the public as having heritage value. We have assembled these sites into a spreadsheet that forms Appendix 1 of our document. Here's an example taken from our spreadsheet, and for some reason it seems to have duplicated itself in transformation. If property owners of any of these sites would like to be included on the Community Heritage Registry, they would have to go through the steps previously identified. This is the community-driven list, and suggestions have been included without any judgment, but they have been divided into A and B lists based on criteria developed by the committee. Several sites outside district boundaries in neighboring areas were submitted by the public. They have also been tabulated and included at the end of the appendix and they have been forwarded to CSRD planning staff. Okay, Steffi? Through our process, this committee has come up with several recommended actions for both the museum and the district of Sycamores. We have included only the recommendations for the district on this slide. Our first recommendation is straightforward: adoption of the registry by council. Our second recommendation is to include heritage in the district's strategic priorities. Thirdly, to initiate a heritage committee. Fourthly, to continue including Splatching and the CSRD in the communication loop. And finally, executing ongoing processes by staff. In summary, we would like to remind you that the purpose of the Community Heritage Registry is to recognize and acknowledge our diverse heritage and to increase its profile. That the Community Heritage Registry is simply a list that does not impede development and that is proposed to be voluntary initially. That listed properties do not have the more designation, and that sites are nominated to the registry by council resolution. Our committee will be grateful if the Planning and Development Committee would see fit to make this recommendation or something similar. That the Planning and Development Committee recommend to council acceptance and adoption of this Community Heritage Registry. On behalf of the Museum Board, our committee and myself, thank you for listening. Are there any questions or comments?
Well, thank you very much, Barb. Great presentation, and thank you and your team for everything you've done and put together. You guys have been working at it for a while, and I remember receiving a phone call from you during the election. And we talked about this. And no, I really think it's great work that what your team has put together. Yeah, I'll open the floor for discussion. Anybody have any questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I read through it all, and it's I was surprised to see one of places I own on the B list. I guess the question is for people to get on this registry. I think you touched on it in your presentation. It is property owner driven, correct?
At this point, yes, voluntary at this point, but council does have the option to make it mandatory. We felt that in order to get the registry established, it would be good to start with those who were interested in it and a passion for it. And then when it's up and running, and if the need arises, then it can become a little more hard line.
Well, I guess follow up on that because what do you mean hard line? Council could designate?
Council has the option to make this mandatory. So they could say, this property needs to be on the registry. But at this point, we're not suggesting that. We want it to be, homeowners want to do it, so we see it as a voluntary initiative at this point.
Great, thank you, Ian. Anybody else? No, I think this is a great thing to move forward to council, and I would make that recommendation that we move it forward, and we might, for the council's benefit, we might have you come back and do another delegation to the full, for all of council, because I think you did a great job. Oh, thanks, Barb.
Yeah, and obviously they've done great work. My contribution was minimal, but it's a hardworking committee. They've done a great job. I I know that in terms of strategic priorities and that sometimes it can be challenging to include them all, but I really like the idea of a formal committee being struck that comes back to council with recommendations, annually, semi-annually, whatever works, because, you've got people whose eyes on the prize are actually dealing with it and bringing it forward. And I think that the fact that these guys are doing this for council and staff is to be commended, because big job, and it's something, like in Communities in Bloom, it was always an issue that was raised by the Communities in Bloom judges, and that was that we really didn't have a formal way of dealing with the heritage of our community. And so, this, community should have this sort of program, so.
Yeah, I agree, Deb. I mean, we're really rich in history here. And, you know, especially with Splatsine and, you know, being on the Trans-Canada Highway and the main route to the west coast, the CP rail and all that. So it is very important. But I would recommend, I'd like to recommend that we take this to council and let council debate it and move forward. And is there a seconder? John, all those in favor? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks, Barb. Okay, well, that's great. Moving right along, Parks and Trails Master Plan. We have, Steffi's gonna do a delegation issue. Just a presentation.
Just presentation
Okay. You have the floor.
there. And we had an initial presentation on this plan in December. There were a couple of changes, some additions to this plan. And the final master plan has been attached to the agenda today. I hope you have a chance to go through it. So the purpose of this plan, this is going to act as a planning tool to direct and manage the existing parks and trails in Sycamoose. And the vision is to protect, maintain, and enhance the existing parks, trails, and facilities and plan for the future while facilitating all-season use and improved accessibility for all ages and abilities. Goals include protecting the environment, better connectivity, better park service and accessibility, and prioritizing community participation and existing community partnerships. For example, environment, just thinking about enhancing and protecting environment, thinking about sustainability while making decisions on the design and implementation of park designs. Connectivity would be to improve the connectivity within the trail system. For example, the Sycamoose Greenways in Sycamoose, doing better connections within different neighborhoods and leading the trails to different points of interest within town. That would encourage people to use those trails more often and do more active transportation within Sycamoose. So this report contains the following information, study of existing policies and guidelines, just a summary on that. New park classification system, park supply and inventory of the existing trails in Sycamoose, recommendations and priority project list, summary of public engagement, and an updated parks and trails map. So this is the park classification system. We talked about that previously, but yeah, we didn't previously have a specific classification system. The previous parks bylaw had just two classification, which is passive parks and commercial parks. That doesn't exactly meet the current needs. So the new park classification system is flexible enough for the changing demographics and also for the future. It would also help with the park asset management and also thinking about acquiring more parkland and trails within Sycamoose. We did a study on the existing park supply within Sycamoose. We did two methods. One was just calculating the number of parkland based on the 1,000 people standard. And the standard used here was the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Plan from 2011. Based on that, we do have enough land. But we also did spatial distribution of these parklands. So community parks and recreation parks, how it's distributed within a person's walking distance of 10 to 20 minutes, and then neighborhood parks, how that's distributed within 5 to 10 minutes. We need more neighborhood parks that are walkable distance from different neighborhoods. It's not properly evenly distributed. And that parkland calculation includes developed and undeveloped parks. It doesn't include road right-of-ways or beach access, pocket parks, or school playgrounds. And coming to the inventory, this master plan includes a detailed inventory of all the parks and trails within Sycamoose. Next, we can talk about the recommendation priority project list if the committee has any project that we want to talk about. I can just give a summary. So we talk about projects regarding bylaws and policies, just making some changes within different bylaws to reflect the existing parks and trails, and also climate change strategy, community connectivity map, updating that, including some things in the bylaw that would improve the tree and canopy protection within sycamores, and creating some sort of park design guidelines as well. Another recommendation was to examine the existing land and just creating a list of future parkland or trails that we could obtain in subdivision or development approval process. Yeah, we have 3 timelines for the projects: short term, which is 3 years, medium term was between 3 and 7 years, and long term was more than 7 years. But yeah, if the committee has any questions or recommendations or changes to be made, this would be taken to the council as well, and then all the changes would be made at once.
Great, great. Thanks, Debbie. I just add that I noticed you put in the White Pines Crescent one that Malcolm had brought up. So that's great. You added that one. Another one I see, because I work right beside the landfill there. A lot of people using the 2 mile waterline trail from Bayview across to 2 mile.
Yeah.
And if we could continue the proposed walkway down in, it stops right at the gate at the dump, the brown line. If we could complete that right down into the 2 mile subdivision. I know you have to cross the highway. I know we've talked about trying to get some kind of crosswalk or something there, but nothing's ever happened. But it just, that's one area that at least it includes the 2 mile people, because a lot of people from 2 mile do hike up and come back down through Bayview.
Connection between the Bayview and the Sycamores Creek.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, down through Sycamores Creek, right into the 2 mile area.
Okay.
No, okay. But no, I think it looks really good. Anybody else have any comments?
Other than there's a lot of parks on here I didn't know we actually had. I mean, I remember looking at this in December, but then I reviewed it pretty thoroughly yesterday. I guess there's some really significant pieces of land here that we could be developing into some pretty great community amenities, and I'm not sure if we have that in our capital plan, or if it's actually maybe something we need to be looking at, is trying to get some of these parks and land actually activated sooner than maybe what we were thinking originally, Mr. Chair. But I guess the one question I have is, like, we have the nature park right there, then right beside it, if you go to that, obviously there's a waterfront parcel. Who owns that? Is that private property? The one with the beach, yeah.
So where we see.
Yeah, that's right.
Park,
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's privately owned. It's actually part of the park property to the north. It's hooked across the river.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just looking at that because obviously there is not an access there. Is that correct?
Correct.
Or, yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's lots of great parks, and we do have projects in the budget. But it's also every year we add to them, and we do have some DCC funds that go into parks. And yeah, you just have to keep adding to it.
And that, yeah, that dog, the nature park, do we have waterfront on that as well? It looks like it's on the map, but I guess there's a little beach waterfront to the nature park, to the lakeside as well. Or am I not correct in that?
You're talking, well, go ahead, Scott.
So I mean, where you can see the green there, it does access Up Lake, yeah.
And people they do walk down there and then walk along the water through the park.
Yeah. But we don't really have too much, I guess, parking in that area. Is that correct as well?
There's a fair amount of parking at enough parking that it's never been over full, right next to Silver Sands there. So there is lots of people park. We walk there all the time, and it's a great park to walk to, and it's got great beaches.
You want to go to the little blurb on that park and just show how you classified it and some of the information you've captured?
The big overall picture is when Old Town Bay develops, the developer, one of his first projects is to put a pedestrian bridge in from Old Town Bay across to the nature park. So it's one of the number one items that they're going to proceed with once they pull the trigger on the development at Old Town Bay.
Are you talking about the nature park?
Right, so. You can see how Steffi's put together kind of a classification and then identify, the size of it, a little description of it, kind of the amenities that are provided there.
Yes. Well, I was just looking at it in general for, obviously, you can never have too much beach access in a town like Sycamus. And, you take a look at these parcels and also in terms of, I believe it's called canoe.
The way paddle trail?
Well, like some of these things seem like they're pretty low hanging fruit that we could get people access to. And it's a lot more access to water, whether you're launching your canoe or you just want to go for a day at the beach. And maybe this is not that expensive for us to actually get the public in there, right? Because I think one of the issues that I always had was, I didn't know some of these areas existed, obviously. So I think it's something for us to look at as we go forward, is trying to figure out, okay, well, how much would this cost? And if it doesn't cost that much, let's get people to know these areas and have them access. So I think it's a great document, and it's just something I hope we really focus on going forward.
Yeah, good point. Go ahead there, Scott.
I think one of the reasons we got involved in this or started this is when there was a lot of discussion about parks in town and where they are and what they are. And we realized that we actually didn't have one document that kind of laid out, a plan, like identifying an inventory and then a priority projects going forward. So that's what this document is trying to do. It's like, hey, where is everything? So some of the recommendations are bylaws and policies. So kind of updating our parks bylaw to classify some of these, however council wants to have them classified, and then we know what we can do with them, and then build that into the capital planning.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, one of the things we have to do is work with also our Economic Development Corporation and our Tourism Advisory Council. We started taking on, we applied to the province for municipal regional district tax for its hoteliers tax. And those funds that are collected in there are now really starting to multiply. And those funds could be used for infrastructure projects like kiosks to show people where the beaches are and where the trails are. So I know I've been pushing really hard for them to actually, get a costing in place so that we can get these park maps done, which you guys have done a great job on, and then get them on a kiosk and then it'll let everybody know where the parks are. Because most of the parks, I mean, even the ones from the houseboat along the trail, along the highway there's beautiful park in there, beautiful sandy beaches in there. The nature park has a beautiful sandy beach up the end there. The dog park has a great beach there when the water's not real high. So there's lots of nice beaches and 2 Mile, and we just don't utilize them in the traveling tourism people that are coming through town don't even recognize that they're there. So it's all coming together. You guys are doing a great job. Deb?
I was just going to build on something that Ian said previously, because I think a lot of our talk with, doing the development to the affordable housing and the whole idea of these pocket parks, they can make a huge difference in terms of revitalizing our downtown too. So, and like you say, that's going to come out of some of that development that's planned. So.
Great.
Can I just ask
Go ahead.
really a specific question, because so we have this canoe park. I was really, that wasn't the one we were talking about in terms of surplus, is it? No.
Well, we were.
Right.
We were trying to work a campground on the other side of the river. And in doing so, we could, but it'd have to go to the taxpayers. Anytime you disposition of any town property, it has to go to the taxpayers. But that would be one property. But it is a canoe launch. People do we don't, it's not open. We gotta get it open and maintain it. And then we did talk about that in our budget about more funds for, for parks. And one of that park there never gets utilized. The gate's always locked and the lawn's not mowed and the trees are growing and, they're getting bigger and before you know it, you won't be able to cut them down because they're in a park. So we got to maintain them. And you're right. It's a great park. It's just a canoe launch and it would be great to be used a little bit more.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just, like, I said, looking through the list, I'm going, wow, okay, if we put a little bit of money into that and then we start advertising as a canoe kayak launch and that's something that I think we are kind of missing in this community. And we already own the land. I mean, that's the most expensive part of it, right? Well, I mean, it's a very large part of the expense. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how to really go forward on it. I think it's just a really good document to have this highlighted because we're sitting on some of these really good pieces. Like you said, there's some great beaches there that we could activate, that we could get people known about it. And it's a big community amenity, right? And I think we really need to zero in on which ones on these lists are the ones that are the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, and what the cost of, maybe fixing up Canoe Park would be, or, activating the beach along the nature trail, like how we would actually get that and then get that known. And then I do think something like that's a really big community amenity, and maybe it wouldn't cost that much. I mean, it's just me spitballing here, but we have some pretty good parcels and I was surprised. So I think this is a really good first step, but I think for council, we should come back and go, okay, maybe we do a project a year or whatever, right? But I think Canoe Park is one of the ones that I saw that I was like, wow, that would be great.
Yep, good point, Ian. And that's another project that Steffi can.
So within the recommendation, we do have Blue Way Paddle Trail, that project. So that would include looking at what are the existing hand launch area and advertising that, and also looking at the potential hand launch area. So we do have a couple of potential hand launch area that we worked a couple of years ago, but it was just stopped abruptly. So we could just go back, talk about it, communicate with Shuswap Trail Alliance, maybe they'll help with that, and yeah, get that started.
Yeah, the Blue Waves trail plan was put together by Lori Wood with the Shuswap Trail Alliance, and they have launches all the way from Malaqua all the way through right to the mouth of the Eagle River. And one was the Eagle River Golf Course area. Another one was at the bridge, and then the Canoe Park. And yeah, there's a few spots. So yeah, we have to expand on that, and that's one of the projects.
And Shuswap Tourism website, they talk about 3 hand launch locations within Sycamores, which is not advertised locally, but then when you go to that website, they have a brochure, and within that you see the 3 locations of Sycamores. But it would be great if we could advertise it.
Great. Nope, thanks, Ian. Thanks, Debbie. Well, that's good. Yeah, so we're gonna bring this to council soon?
Yeah, Scott is bring it to the next meeting.
But committee of the whole during the day, so Steffi can present to the council. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Okay, no, thanks very much. That's great. Much appreciated. Okay, all right, moving right along. Okay, item D, 524 Thompson Place. Scott, take it away. Sarah, take it away.
We have a positive recommendation from staff to the PDC. Next slide. So this is where the subject property is located. It's one of the last parcels available in the Thompson subdivision up across the rail line there off of Solsquests Road. Next slide. So the area is designated general industrial in our official community plan and is zoned I-1 industrial general under the zoning bylaw. Next slide. This is the proposed buildings. This is a light industrial building. There's an image of the front elevation that will be facing the street. It's about 475 square meters in floor area. It'll have metal siding with wood accents. They're proposing 6 large shrubs along the front lot line and doing some xeriscaping with gravel and rock. This will be the home of the Delburn Foundry, and the type of work they propose to be doing there would be prototyping, printing, some light machining, CAD design, this type of thing. So we've also got some images here. The lighting, this is the fixture they're proposing to use on the outside of the building where they need it. They are able to apply a shield on there to prevent it from shining into the road and blinding people, for example. The building down here at the bottom of this image is an example of some of the color scheme they're looking at. So they're looking at dark green and light brown, and they haven't 100% solidified how exactly that will be applied to the building, but this is an example they provided. And then we've got an example of kind of how they propose to treat the driveway and parking areas in relation to the actual landscape bed areas. So they're looking at just using contrasting rock to kind of define them. Next slide. So the variances that they're requesting setbacks, so they can push the building back a couple meters into the 6 meters so that there would be a 4-meter setback to provide space for parking out front of the building. They're looking at varying the parking service just because of the cost at the moment, and in future are looking at doing asphalt or cement. But right now they'd like to do clean crushed gravel, which is what council has already approved variances for on a couple of the other industrial lots in that subdivision. And then they're also looking to vary the number of stalls required for the square footage of this building. So from 5 to 4, there just isn't quite enough room to accommodate that extra parking space. Next slide. In terms of discussion, the variances that are requested are relatively minor, in my opinion, and they're consistent with previous variances that have been granted to other properties in this subdivision. The landscaping is also consistent with what other properties have provided, very minor, and they've agreed to ensure that they are fire smart and water smart plant varieties. The proposed finishing approach in terms of the colors and type, it's very positive. I think it'll have a very positive impact on that area. It'll look nice. They do need to revise their access permit. They did get an access permit, but they've got 2 accesses. And I think that after talking to Jeremy, it looks like where the access permit was originally proposed, it might not be quite in line with where they actually want their driveway. So they might need to adjust it, and they can work with Jeremy on that in terms of amending that. So this proposal is supported by staff. I've included the comments from our internal referral. And that is all.
Okay, great. I'd read the motion, but I don't have,
Slide.
it's on the screen there. Okay, that the Planning and Development Committee recommend council authorize a development permit number 23-153 DP to permit the development of a light industry building. The development variance permit number 23-153 DVP to vary the requirements of the rear setback, the number of parking spaces, and the surfacing of parking and access roads for the property legally described as Lot 1, Section 1, Township 22, Range 8, west of the 6th Meridian, KDYD Plan EPP 110661, located at 524 Thompson Place. Can I have a mover? Okay, Ian, seconder. John, discussion? Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Just a couple, and I guess it either staff or the proponent. I see through all the documents. I mean, I got part of it. I didn't get these sort of slides, but I see this is going all the way back to 2022. And I guess we're talking about landscape plans back in 2022. Why? How long did this take to get through the process, or is it where?
We got this last week and here we are today.
Well, okay, then I must have the wrong documents, because Kelly Bennett is listed as corporate officer and authorized and issued by resolution day of 2022. Do you guys not have this under the DP?
So there's an error on the draft permit.
Oh, yeah, then I guess is the,
Okay, I can correct that before it goes to council.
oh, I'm looking at the development permit at 23-153 DP to Douglas Kent Burn. And then you go down to the bottom of it, it has Kelly Bennett listed as corporate officer. And it has a 2022 date.
Go ahead, Scott.
I think that's the draft. Kelly is the corporate officer, so she signs off on the permits. And I think probably the draft permit, we just have 2022 as the date. We'll up when it's
Oh.
right. We'll update that date. Kelly will sign it and say it's issued on this date. So it makes the resolution.
Okay, so that confused me because I thought, okay, well, has this been going on since 2022? That's why I'm asking that question. Okay. Then I guess that takes care of that one. Yeah. I mean, I'm in support of the application. I think this looks great. Yeah. Really thank the proponents for coming to Sycamoose and building this here. These are the types of projects we want to make sure that we're advancing, and we're doing it expeditiously as well. So that's why I asked about the 2022 thing.
Just finish with some of the meetings first. Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, so just a quick question to Sarah as far as the fire smart, water smart landscaping and xeriscaping and that. So that's great because of course we've talked about that before. Like, are we sure that what we're doing is I guess just coming back to our lack of success with some of the plantings previously in that industrial area, you know, like I know the Walmart and whatever and having to redo. So we're moving forward in terms of getting things that actually will be successful out there.
Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, one thing I'd just add to that before I talk to Doug or Doug comes forward is we at one time we did discuss maybe trying to come up with a plan because it is the industrial park. Some of the areas like Walmart or Ames is not very well landscaped and it doesn't look that well. And maybe it didn't get the same, you know, the same go over like the rest of them. But, you know, the cedars are dying all the time. And is there any possible way we could change our bylaw? So the industrial park's almost sold out, I guess, but, you know, instead of spending so much money on everybody's landscaping, because it is an industrial park and a lot of it gets neglected after time, is we make a nice, beautiful entrance and everybody kick in, you know, $250, $500 for an entrance and do a nice sign and do a nice flower bed and have it irrigated. Is there any possible way we could do that, Sarah and Scott?
Through the chair. So in terms of OCP updates, yeah, we would probably look at updating the industrial development permit area as part of that project.
Okay.
That you've tasked staff with and look at that. It would happen more upfront at the initial stage of a subdivision where that could be negotiated to do a gateway treatment. And at this point, it's really either the district can go in and put something in the roadway or there's not a lot we can do at this point in terms of.
Because we're halfway through the subdivision. Okay. Oh, thank you. And then, yeah, I wouldn't mind the proponent speaking. Doug and Brian are here. And I just want, before you start, I just wanted to ask one question. Are you considering hooking up to the biomass system at all? Have you been approached or have you? Great, okay.
It's possible I could feed back into that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, you bet. Okay, you go ahead and you take the floor.
Yep. Maybe 13 months. Streets. Then we hit. Building. Which allows because of the prices increases. Been here 20 years. Wanting to retire here. I've been looking 20 years to rent a bay suitable for vacuum semi in and us moving this way and bringing some business here, hopefully. Our background is the foundry side of it. As far as lighting fixtures, we build lighting fixtures, like sell lighting fixtures all over the world. We're getting, I want to get more into the We do escapes, we do boards, we do Main Street beautifications, projects, new casting, signage, park benches, plaques, bench plaques, direction plaques, new casting, everything. So I think that would be great. The knowledge with this. So I'm hoping I kind of so too. Yeah. One of the big things I will say is not having anything here to rent. So I could have done it in smaller steps. So,
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you very much, Doug. No, we really appreciate you coming to the community. And like I say, I know you've been here for a long time and it's but yeah, no, the opportunity for the family to, to migrate here or, Brian and Emily are already here and we really look forward to working with you. And if there's anything you need, by all means, don't be afraid to ask.
Chris and I, we are on the board back in Delaware. We actually were part of building a big building as incubator for a small town, which basically I'm not sure how many businesses have gone through that to get a stepping stone. Branch off. Like that.
Great. No, another success story. It's great. This is great to hear. Okay, that's good. Brian, you have anything to add or everything's good? Okay, great. Okay, staff are good. Great. All right, we have a mover and a seconder. Lots of discussion on that one. All those in favor? Great. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, moving right along. 515 Dogwood ALR. Yeah, and I guess, is this Sarah?
I can take this one, sure. So you have Jack here, Jack Elsner. So Jack's submitted a proposal to us. You can see the location of it just at the end of Dogwood and Cottonwood, where Dogwood and Cottonwood meet. There's a larger property and we're focusing on the property just at the southern end. So if you continue to, is it Capel straight across, then you'd see where two lots could be created. So if you go to the next slide, so they're proposing two half-acre lots. Did enough, right? Half acre? Oh, 2/4 acre lot. Half-acre lots, yeah. Quarter hectare lots. And they're proposing for residential use. So the process would be they submit an application to the Agricultural Land Commission through their process. The Land Commission sends it to us and then to council, and then council makes a recommendation that goes back to Land Commission, and then the Land Commission makes these decisions. These days, it's very challenging for a subdivision within the ALR. You have to show why your subdivision improves agriculture on the property or improves agriculture in the area. So we just talked with Jack with a strategy on how to move this forward. One option was a rezoning. So it was rezoning, we were thinking maybe country residential that includes agriculture as a use. But we could actually move forward without the rezoning. Our bylaw does allow for subdivisions if the ALC has already approved them. So that might be the best path forward. What part of the application is, why is this good for agriculture? So it could be a good option where, it's going to create two large properties where people can have some kind of hobby farms or market garden type farms. And we can see it, adding to the agricultural viability of the larger parcel, because we have those 5 little lots that would be impacted by any bigger agricultural operation. So we could see this as almost being a buffer between the larger agricultural parcel. Then you'd have kind of your larger hobby farm residential properties, and then the other residential properties. But yeah, we still have some things to work out as far as access. So we probably would require the road dedication. We talked to Jack, he's not keen on building the road, but it might not be required to build the road, but definitely getting that dedication on Capel Street. A lot of steps to move forward with, but I recommended Jack come here so he could kind of present his idea to the committee. And then if the committee has any advice for him going forward, we can add that, Jack can add that all into his application to the Land Commission, and then we bring it back here once we start that formal process.
Great, thanks, Scott. Jack, would you like to say a few words? No?
Enough time with Scott and Sarah, they pretty much know. But it's true about that piece. We've been in town actually 20 years too. And if you're from Delaware. His neighbors, but.
Yeah.
We watched Bud on the farm for years and years and years. We were here actually 20 years ago. 5 years ago, we started doing the development. We put the house on it, put the garage on, made it our home. It's our home place now. We worked up at Hayfield. We seeded that. We do sharecrop with Daddy Johnson. And we got a couple critters on there. We got a couple of big horses. Got a Louie. Everybody needs a Louie. That's our donkey. And feed a beast. So we do that on the side. And we always look at that little piece and trying to figure out what a person could do with it, because 5 lots right up the back, and to Scott's point, use it, treat it as a buffer zone. We got the property complete. And we went in and cleaned up on that side, but push comes to shove, we watched that property. We used to walk down and I owned it, and Bud never did farm on it, but that used to be all the neighborhood kids used to run and that took that place. But I think that's a really good opportunity and a good solution to a piece of land that could become very viable for a couple of families in town.
Okay, no, that's good. Anybody in the committee have any comments or concerns?
No, but other than just to wish you luck with the ALR. I mean, no, I think this is something that I've expressed concerns about before in terms of how ALR is constricting some of the growth, and it's not really adding much to agriculture, as you said. And I certainly hope they can see the value here, because I think there's a lot of room for us to use non-productive ALR land that is not or hasn't been ever probably used for agriculture, or it's been a very long time, to help solve some of the housing problems that we have. So I certainly support this and wish you all the luck in the world.
Thanks, Ian. Deb?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know if they'll buy it, but I think, the buffer argument is a wonderful one in terms of, like getting that separation, because it's something you should always be trying to achieve, is a transition there from your more, dense residential into the agriculture. And you got a couple market garden homes there that, I think it's a wonderful idea. It's do they buy it? I don't know, like Ian, good luck. I hope, really hope that it works.
Okay, thanks, Deb. And Jack, I think we all agree it's a great, it would be a great asset to the community. And I mean, they're nice big lots, and yeah, it would, if you could make them into a little bit of a hobby, farm of some sort, and it would be great. So I know we'll support you, and we'd like to bring this to, have staff bring this to council and have a supporting document for you to go to the ALC and help you through that process. Yeah, thank you. Great. Anything else, Scott?
No, I think that's everything. So we'll work with Jack on his application.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you. All right, moving right along. Item F, last item on the agenda, housing strategy implementation, OCP and zoning bylaw amendments. Who's got this one? Sarah.
I've got this one. So it looks like we have the Housing Committee Chair, Brenda Dalzell, in the gallery, just an FYI. And we also have Housing Committee Member, Councillor McCabe, in the gallery too. Okay. So staff has a couple recommendations for the committee regarding a couple amendment bylaws. We can go through the proposals first. Next slide. So as you're aware, Council endorsed our housing strategy earlier this year and directed staff to begin implementation. So the strategy included a number of more short-term actions, things that were considered by the housing committee to be low-hanging fruit that were easily implemented and could start having an impact as early as this year on our housing supply. So these are the strategies that we're looking at implementing through, we've got an OCP amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment on the table here. So strategy 1.1, enable diverse housing types. Strategy 1, action 1, update the R1 zone to support, duplexes with secondary dwellings, which we've already seen an amendment for that for one property, and single family dwellings with additional secondary dwelling units. Strategy 3.1, promote gentle infill. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. Strategy 3, action 1, amend the official community plan. And this was a bigger one, but the housing committee was really this and wanted to see this move forward, to designate some low density residential areas that are readily developed, they're already serviced, as medium density residential in support of gentle infill. Next slide. So what does that boil down to? Update our existing R1 zone, update the residential policies of the official community plan, update the residential land use designations in that plan, those policy statements, and update the multi-development permit area to speak to an infill program. So our OCP currently does talk about infill, but there isn't a lot in there to create good kind of direction for people to so they understand what that is and what that means in terms of this broad scope of different approaches they could take in terms of developing their own properties through, zoning amendments. So what is gentle infill? So gentle infill is an approach to increasing housing stock. It looks at lower density areas that have existing servicing, and putting to use underutilized parcels. So we have a lot of properties with a house smack in the middle and tons of land around it where people aren't necessarily really using that space. The other, benefit of gentle infill is that it increases the tax base to support that infrastructure that's already existing in terms of maintenance and any upgrades that might be needed. There's a few images on here of what that kind of looks like, and it can take a number of forms. So we've got a triplex on here. We've got a triplex that's an up-down instead of side-by-side with a carriage house. And then we've also got a couple narrow lot infill parcels in an existing neighborhood where they took 2 side yards and split that in half. Or it may have been originally one lot with a little house on it and they split it in half and put 2 narrow infill houses on there. Next slide. So our current R1 zone, so we did just adopt a new zoning bylaw and we did build in there as much as we could considerations to support housing. So what does our current R1 zone already support? It already supports duplexes. So I've got some images here. I'll just rotate that so you can see that better. Duplexes, smaller parcels, narrow parcels are supported by our current zone with a secondary dwelling. It will also support to some extent, they might need a frontage relaxation because of the reduced parcel size and frontage requirement. It will support panhandle subdivision, where you subdivide off the house in the front and you create a new parcel in the back and do another house, or vice versa. And it also supports this type of development where you split it in half with a shared driveway to kind of reduce the number of driveways kind of idea. And again, so with secondary suites, just wanted to squeeze that in there. So we currently support 1 dwelling unit with 1 secondary suite. Next slide. So the proposed changes, this is largely around just increasing the number of secondary dwelling units people can have on their property. So they can already split their property in half and create extra income for themselves that way and create additional parcels for housing. But we're also looking at increasing how many dwelling units they can have on the property that are accessory to they're smaller and therefore more affordable to build and maintain and be rent out, or our bylaw also allows people to use it as a bed and breakfast. So either way, it supports home ownership through that. So what we're talking about is adding additional ones. So when we did our survey for the housing strategy, there was a lot of support for increased density in general, and also a lot of interest in being able to have more than 1 secondary suite. So what could that look like? I've got some images on the bottom here to give you an idea. You know, it could be a garden suite potentially that actually has 2 units, one up, one down. There's that possibility. Also, something like this where you've got an attached secondary dwelling, you've got a suite in your building. Our bylaw doesn't, you don't have to have the basement, FYI. It could also be a detached building or a combination thereof, right? So here's what we're proposing to do. We're looking at updating our definition of floor area to remove the word basements. So in terms of how we calculate floor area to determine how big your secondary dwelling unit can be, we tweak that to provide a little more floor area to base that on, so that secondary unit can be a little bigger. The other is definitions of secondary suite, replace single unit dwelling with use dwelling unit, because we're talking about allowing 2 unit duplexes having secondary suites. So we want to make sure that that all works. Density. So this is in the zone itself, these next few. Increasing the maximum density of units per parcel from 2, which so currently allows either a duplex or a single unit dwelling with a secondary suite, to 4. Well, I'll talk about more about why 4 in a minute. And this is to support an increased number of secondary dwelling units, consistent with the maximum density of a 2 unit dwelling with secondary dwellings. So this in general, it supports somebody having a duplex on a property that also has secondary suites. And amongst staff, the discussion was, well, why wouldn't we just allow it to be 4 in general? Like, why would you have to build a duplex in order to get 4 units? Why not have 1 principal dwelling unit and 3 secondary units? And they're not all necessarily going to be detached, right? So continuing on, the other change in the zone would be separating sleeping unit density into its own bullet point. Currently, it's part of one, so we're just trying to clarify the zone to make it easier to read and understand. For floor area, adding a new section for floor area under height. And this is because of this regulation is specifically for accessory buildings. And why is this? Because we've had a lot of complaints about the floor area, like really big accessory buildings going into our existing residential neighborhoods that look like barns or Quonsets, or there's that issue. And height hasn't been an issue with them. So our current height allowed is 6 meters. And so basically buildings, really big buildings that people are not liking to go in. And then I'm also seeing applications for coach houses that are just these massive, massive buildings where now the building is, an accessory building is meant to be subservient to the principal use, which in this case is the house. It's not meant to be bigger than and dwarf the house. So this is what we're seeing, and we already know, I won't go into the details, but it's another file that the committee's seen before in a prior iteration. And anyway, I can see this being an issue. So the proposal is to set a maximum floor area just for the accessory building part. It wouldn't affect the floor area of the actual coach house, the dwelling unit in the building, but it would bring that floor area down so that if somebody wanted to do something a little bit bigger, they'd have to come for a variance. And then that way, at least there's an opportunity to negotiate what that building looks like so that it's a little more, it'll fit in the neighborhood better and try to reduce the kind of complaints that we've been getting about these big buildings. So it's looking at setting a maximum of 80 square meters. And I would say that it would be reasonable for someone to apply for a variance to go to 100 square meters because you've got room to put 2 large vehicles in a building like that side by side. Sorry, there was a lot on that, but next one. Sorry, Steffi, back. So in the last change would be removing 11A, which is in the general regulations, the R1 zone. And that is an old reg that came over from our previous R1 zone, which basically just says that you can't have secondary suites, which is an internal unit inside a duplex. So now we just opened it up. So duplex can have detached as well as ones that are inside the building or attached to the building. Next slide. So in terms of amendments to the official community plan, so I just want to point out here that in terms of the low density residential, we don't need to amend the maximum density in that land use designation to support the proposed changes with the R1 zone at this point, just so you're aware that density allows what we're talking about with the R1 zone. So we're looking at updating the universal design principles, just some formatting to make those principles clearer and cleaner so that we can refer to them in other parts of our policy, residential policy. And then adding a section that speaks to adaptable design standards as a bare minimum. So the thing with the universal design principles, they're great, but there's sort of this amorphous thing that asks you to consider how your proposal does something, but there isn't anything in place to help people out in terms of, well, here's a bare minimum of what that actually should look like. So this is what I'm talking about adding. So it's just a policy statement saying that we will adopt some standards around that. And there'll be a later project coming forward. Housing Committee's seen it, but there's still some discussion around it that actually would include those standards. So at the beginning of our chapter 3, that's our residential chapter, looking at updating that whole front piece, the introductory text. So it currently speaks to old information, old data. We've got a housing needs assessment now and a housing strategy. So update that verbiage to reflect that, and also add in some targets for housing. And this is something that's important that we need adopted in there to support any applications the district makes for funding to support housing initiatives. We need to have targets to speak to how many units with how many bedrooms for the next 3 years to 2026. So that's in there. Have a look. You might be surprised by what we actually need to build to meet our growth targets. So the low density residential, there's some changes in there in terms of kind of reorganizing a few things. So there's a few policy statements that make more sense in the general policy statements for residential that speak to all land use designations. So those were moved. What was the other thing here? Updated the language to reflect the fact that we've got a housing strategy now and there's some actual specific guidance in there. And removed one little clause that limits the siting of secondary dwellings. It wants them just in rear yards. We've seen some successful examples in our community that already exist that are in the front yard. So I don't see any reason why we need to limit where it's placed on the property. As long as we can get it to fit and it looks decent, I think it's okay. Changes to the medium density residential land use designation policy. Looking at adding in some policies and incentives to support gentle infill specifically, and increase the diversity of the housing stock that we currently have. Addition of policy to support decreased private open space in exchange for contributions to public open space. Increased density trigger for private open space. So in terms of when we start asking for it, we've set like a higher bar. So you can put in more units before there's a requirement to provide that, and then potentially provide cash in lieu to local parks or something like that. So some changes to the multifamily development permit area guidelines, and that's more specifically to speak to infill within existing neighborhoods to help make sure that it is indeed gentle. And fits in with the existing character and has like a minimal impact on what that looks like and how it feels to be in that neighborhood. So also looking at in terms of exemptions, so the exemptions have been updated as well, so that we can really speak to our housing gaps that have been identified in housing needs assessment to sort of remove the necessity for a development permit for these smaller scale developments. And then Schedule A, our land use designation map, expanding the medium density land use designation into our low density areas. So this is something we talked about a fair bit with the Housing Committee. And the reasoning for that is our existing medium density land use is in a portion of town that has just been developed with brand new single family houses. There's really like low likelihood of there being any change to that land use. So we need more land that's readily available for a zoning amendment, say, to make it easier for people to actually do this. So we're looking at this stage, removing a step in the red tape by expanding this into existing serviced areas that are low hazard. So they're not in a wildfire hazard area. They're not in a debris flow hazard area or a steep slope hazard area. Next slide. So this is the idea of what this proposed OCP amendment would do. So in the middle is an image of a neighborhood, single family neighborhood with some different mixes of different housing types in there, it doesn't feel too different. When you kind of look at that, you know, you have to really kind of look to see the buildings that are, so the idea is sprinkles. It would be sprinkled through the neighborhood. And basically we would see this kind of change happen on properties that are ripe, they're ready, they've fallen into disrepair and they're ready for redevelopment. Obviously properties that are still in good condition will probably remain as they are, but that's what we have our secondary suite program for, see if we can encourage and entice people to put in these extra units. So this would also support these other building types. So this is actually an up-down triplex, the top left-hand corner. Looks like a normal house, but there's actually 3 principal units in there. The one on the right corner, sorry, was I saying left and right wrong? That's a small townhouse development, 3 units. Down on the bottom left, this is another kind of up down, there might even be 6 units in there with a coach house. It's like, why not? Why not have a coach house as well? Different kind of format for duplexes. They don't have to look like a traditional 80s or 90s duplex. And then this here is a really interesting approach to, say, 3 units that's kind of stepped back and creates open space for residents on a property. Next slide. So here's our existing land use designation map, just so you can kind of see. Density. So as you're aware, like this is all kind of loaded. And then there's already a few multifamily developments that are in there, so they're already done. And we're looking at these areas here. So we did specifically survey on these specific neighborhoods for the housing strategy, the Tree Streets, the Rama Ave Crescent area, and this area here. I can't remember what we referred to it as. But we gave people some very specific areas with maps, like how would you feel about increased density in these areas? And there was good support for that. So next slide. So here's the map that is attached to the OCP amendment bylaw. And this is the idea of what that would look like. So you can see the expanded purple area. So the idea behind this is that by increasing, like doing a good solid increase, density increase in over a broad area, that will reduce the land value, because currently what we have for existing multifamily pre-zone lots, there aren't very many around. And in terms of resale value, it's so high that it really discourages developers from actually buying them and developing them because there's so few. So by increasing the land base, the idea is that it'll help bring that cost down. The other idea is that it's already serviced. There's water and sewer there already, right? We're not looking at issues like we are looking at on, say, Riverside Avenue, where there isn't water flush. And we're talking about much higher density on Riverside than what we're talking about today with infill, dental infill. And the other piece is that because it's larger, it'll result in sprinkles, which is ideal, right? Not just mass blocks all at once. It'll be a slow, gradual change throughout neighborhoods that won't feel intrusive. Next slide. All right, so here are the recommendations.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. I'll read both recommendations. One's for the zoning amendment, and one's for the official community plan, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Okay, recommendation that the Planning and Development Committee recommend council give first and second reading to the District of Sycamore zoning amendment bylaw number 1038/2023, this 3rd day of May 2023. And also that the Planning and Development Committee recommend give council first and second reading to the District of Sycamore official community plan amending amendment bylaw number 1039/2023, this 3rd day of May 2023. Can I have a mover? Deb, seconder, John, discussion? Anybody have any comments?
I got a few questions.
Okay, go ahead, Darine.
Okay, so we talked last time when we had the short-term rentals come up before us about parking. I don't. Have we taken that into account as we go forward with this? There's obviously going to be parking demands. What have we allowed for that?
So in terms of the development permit area, that's where we would be looking at site plans and where the parking is going. The other components are we've got an updated traffic bylaw coming. that you'll see in the next few weeks. In terms of looking at things like parking and maximum, like setting maximum driveway widths and rolling out an updated process for applications for wider driveways or more driveways. So we can certainly look at a policy around that, but mostly we'll be relying on the development permit area guidelines to look at where these would go. So all those images that I showed you, those drawings, all provided very excellent examples of how parking should be dealt with on a property, and those would become embedded in that development.
It's gonna be a one-off, right? Like each development you're gonna look at, and then you're gonna judge it based on parking. So kind of where I'm going with this is, okay, we're gonna rezone it all to medium residential or density. No,
Not rezoning, no, just.
oh, you're just allowing it, right?
So what it means, so because it's a land use designation change, it'll support someone to apply for a zoning amendment. So we're not proposing to change all the zoning, just the R1 zone for secondary suites. So that's very minor. So then someone's gonna have to apply for a zoning amendment to do something else. Say they want to do townhouse, say they get a couple lots together, say corner lots, then they'd have to do a zoning amendment. So that's where we have the opportunity to do this negotiation around parking and ensure that, right? And it's council's decision. Council approves that zone, right? So council.
So I guess my question is, each application is gonna be dealt with on the parking side of it.
Of course, even if the zoning requirement is removed, it would still have to be dealt with at the building permit phase in terms of it has to speak to what the zoning bylaw requires. And it has to speak to what you're allowed to have for access through our traffic law and zoning bylaw. Yeah.
Okay, and then another one, water and sewer. I mean, we've talked about that at council. There's some concerns around it for sure. We have development pressures down Riverside where, there's only so much we could put down there right now. Have we mapped in those areas where we actually have adequate water and sewer?
So as part of this conversation, we did a whole, we looked at lands in terms of what our existing land use designation was, where is the servicing? So we had service maps, we had all this information there and went through it and kind of discussed this. I shouldn't say kind of, we did. Malcolm's here, he can tell you. But we did talk to Jeremy, who's our key guy when it comes to that. And in terms of what we're talking about with the R1 zone and it's not gonna all happen overnight, right? We've got our servicing that's there will support what we're talking about with the R1 zone. Right? And then the reason why I'm not talking about bringing in as of right zoning, so some new zones to support things like townhouses, triplexes, that kind of thing right off the bat, is because I would like to get funding to do an analysis. So Jeremy's been working on, Jeremy and Daryl, over the last year or two, getting all of our infrastructure assessed to see what's there, what needs updating. From there, that data is almost ready to be given to the district. From there, we can get another study done looking at these areas in terms of what can we support specifically in terms of density. So from there, then I would like to bring in as of right zoning based on where infrastructure, where it makes sense from an infrastructure perspective in terms of water and sewer.
Right, so that's what I was kind of getting at. We don't know that precisely yet.
Right, so that's why we want to do this on a case by case basis at this point.
Okay.
These the bigger.
Yep.
Yeah.
I got
Go ahead.
more. So the premier has announced that each lot should have up to 4 dwelling units. So I guess this is in line with that as well. Okay. And then the other question I had was, so we're talking about, I mean, we have percentage use of lots, right? You can only build out 60% of it. Have we looked at saying, why can't it be 80 on a lot instead of 60 or 40, or what's the rationale of not taking a look at what we could build out on a lot?
We haven't needed to at this point. Parcels are so.
It's just because we haven't needed to.
We don't need to, yeah. So our new R1 zone, we looked at that in terms of what that parcel size is. So the new parcel size allows for all these lots in the tree streets, for example, to be split in half. And then when you start talking about accessory buildings, well, you can stack stuff on top, right? Parcel coverage is about how much of the parcel you're covering. It's not talking about stories. So basically, like you look at an existing property, the parcel coverage currently is like 18 to 20%. There's a lot of room to add density on an existing parcel. This point is, it's just not, we just don't really need to. Yeah.
Okay. That's it for the moment.
Great, thanks, Ian. Deb or John, anybody else have any comments?
You know, like the question and Ian's already, I guess, alluded to it with the premier's comments that you always go, okay, so now we're doing this, like, and then are we gonna come back and double it at some point? But yet, like you say, if it's not required, we just deal with what we need to right now, I guess, so.
Great, thank you, Deb. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, carried. All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to adjournment. Recommended the Planning Development Committee meeting for May 3rd, 2023 be adjourned at 10:45. In, on. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Yes, thanks, Scott.
3 hours. 3 hours from the beginning of the first.
Yeah.